All right, you're here for one of two reasons. Either you're brand new to spraying DipYourCar products and you're afraid you don't know how to do it quite right, or you've been spraying for a while and you're not getting the finish or the results that you're looking for. Either way, I'm going to help you today. We're going to go over exactly how to spray our aerosols, our hyperdip, and our gallons straight out of the DipYourCar guns, and 99 times out of 100, it just comes down to you not spraying wet enough. We're going to cover it all. Let's get started. So myself, Gabe, and other team members are managing customer service emails, messages, and phone calls all the time. We're trying to give you the support that you need, and we love talking to you about your projects. But something that comes up almost every day is somebody will say, listen, I'm happy with the way it came out, but I got a little more texture than I prefer. It's not quite as smooth as I wanted. And like I said, almost every time it comes down to the customer not spraying the product wet enough. Even if you're a customer who's sprayed DYC products for a long time, there's a really good chance you are not spraying it wet enough, even if you think you are. So today I'm going to cover everything. I'm going to go over DipYourCar aerosols and aerosol top coats. I'm going to cover hyperdip because even though they're an aerosol, they're a different spray technique than the DipYourCar aerosols. And then of course, I'm going to show you how to spray DipYourCar base colors and pearl top coats out of both of our DYC sprayers. So I'm going to demonstrate each one for you. Sit back and relax. We've got a lot to cover. Let's jump right in. So we're going to start small and begin with DipYourCar aerosols. This is anthracite, a very popular base coat color. And because aerosols should only be used on small surfaces like mirror caps, wheels, emblems, we're going to be working on a small surface here. So with the DipYourCar aerosols, we're going to start with a 50% starting coat. Then we're going to go to full wet. So 50% starting coat, very straightforward. Light passes just so that about 50% of the surface is covered. We're going to let that dry, usually about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll go into our wet coats. So our starting coat is nice and dry. We're going to move into our wet coats now. Now with the DipYourCar aerosols, everything after the starting coat is nice and wet. And you're going to hear me say something across every single project we work on today. You ever heard of the phrase, drag the wet edge across the panel? That's essentially what we're trying to do. And what that means is as I start at the top of the panel and work my way down, I want the top of the panel to be fully wet, and then I want to drag that wet edge down as I go. If you're spraying Plasti Dip or DipYourCar aerosols and you notice that the surface that you're looking at is dry or pixelated, you're not spraying wet enough. My goal here is going to be to drag that wet edge top to bottom. Now, of course, there's a technique here, and sometimes it takes a little bit of practice. You don't want to move so slow that the paint is building up and bubbling on the surface. You want to use your passes to wet that surface out. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to move about a medium speed, and I'm going to overlap 50%, sometimes even 75% of my last coat and work that wet edge down. So did you notice that the entire panel was fully wet as I moved down? I dragged that wet edge all the way down. Now this peelable coating is going to get to dry as one uniform film, and it's going to dry really flat and smooth. This is essentially exactly what we're going to do for the Plasti Dip aerosols, the top coat aerosols, hyperdip, even with the sprayer system. Same idea, just a slightly different technique each time. So let's let this dry. All right, so our wet coat of anthracite is dry, and as you can tell, spraying it wet like that and dragging that wet edge top to bottom allowed it to dry really nice and flat. It's super smooth. Plasti Dip's never going to get quite as smooth as a hyperdip, for example, but this looks great. But you may say to yourself, well, I've got a pearl top coat going on top. And it doesn't really help if you're going to have a super smooth base if you can't get your top coat smooth. And I will tell you, top coats are traditionally harder to get smooth than base coats. And that comes down to one simple thing. It doesn't matter what coating you're using, matte finishes will always look smoother than satin or gloss, because the higher the sheen level, the more the reflections are going to show what's on the surface and the more the texture will be exposed. So if you're going to be buying these products, we want you to get a great end result. Now when it comes to spraying the Pearl Top Coat aerosols, like this one I've got purple interference, which is going to go over the anthracite, we want to do the same exact thing. We want to drag that wet edge using our passes down. The difference in technique here is that the top coat aerosols are going to wet out faster and easier than the base coat color. So you're going to see me use a little bit more speed as I go. So once you get it going, it's going to start wetting out. We want to avoid drips and runs. We want to avoid solvent pop. And that's where that kind of fine line comes in between fully wetting out the surface and overdoing it. It could take a little bit of practice, but you really can dial it in. Now again, the panel is completely fully wet top to bottom. There's no pixelations. I can't identify any singular droplets. It went on nice and wet. That's going to allow it to dry super smooth as one unified coating. Let's let this dry. So we've got our wet coat of our Pearl Top Coat down. It's nice and dry, and again, nice and smooth. So just keep this in mind. That first coat is going to be a starter coat, about 50% coverage of your base. Then every base coat after should be nice and wet. Drag that wet edge across, practice if you have to. Pearl Top Coats, same thing. You're usually going to be around 4 to 5 wet coats of base and anywhere between 2 to 4 wet coats of Pearl Top Coat. So what are we looking out for though? Because this is great to say and it seems easy. Where could you go wrong? Well, one thing is corners. If you have tight corners or concave areas, you're not going to be able to fully wet out in those areas without worrying about some collections where it might drip or run. So don't push it too hard in the corners. Let those passes fully wet it out. Also, you want to make sure the humidity is low. You want to make sure there's no air blowing directly on the surface that you're working on, even though of course you want good ventilation. But that's the general idea when spraying the DipYourCar aerosols and trying to get a nice smooth finish. Let's move on to hyperdip. Okay, let's move on to hyperdip. So hyperdip is another peelable aerosol coating, but it is quite different in the way that you spray hyperdip versus the way you spray the DipYourCar or Plasti Dip aerosols. So hyperdip sprays a little bit more like a spray paint. You don't have to pull it up quite as heavy, and there's a different technique from start to finish. So, like always, we're going to want to make sure our panel is nice and clean, especially when using hyperdip. It's a little bit more sensitive to surface defects like fish eyes. So the first 4 coats of hyperdip are going to be super light. I'm talking dust coats. Let me show you what I mean. You may not even see much on the panel, but your first 4 coats are going to be super light tack coats. That's going to allow the hyperdip, which is a lower viscosity, much smoother paint-like peelable coating, to set up properly. It only takes about 5 to 8 minutes in between each tack coat, so I'm going to hammer those on. So our 4 tack coats have dried. I really want you to pay attention to how light those coats were, because when I say super light dust coats, I mean super light dust coats. Now every coat from here moving forward is going to be a nice wet coat. You're usually going to average between 4 to 6 wet coats of hyperdip after your tack coat. So with hyperdip, it's a different technique. Same concept though. We want to drag that wet edge across the panel. If you're spraying the panel and you see some pixelation or individual droplets, you're not spraying wet enough. But the difference with hyperdip is we are not going to be as close. We are not going to move quite as slow. We're going to do 75% overlaps, back and forth like a typewriter. Boom, 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 boom. And we're going to let the coating wet itself out. That's how we're going to get the smoothest finish and avoid any drips or runs. It looks like this. So that wet edge from top to bottom, the entire panel fully wet, and like always, this allows the coating to dry as one uniform, wet, film, and that's going to give us the smoothest results. That's going to take about 15 to 25 minutes to dry, depending on your temperature. Okay, our wet coat of Hyperdip is dry. This is shadow black, one of the most popular colors. It's a nice rich satin black, and it is super smooth, like about as smooth as a peelable aerosol can get. And every one of your wet coats, you're going to want to try to replicate the same technique. Use your passes, use your overlaps, and drag that wet edge across the surface. Now with Hyperdip, what are the things you want to look out for? Very similar to the other aerosols. Watch those tight corners, watch those concave surfaces. Don't force the product into any tight areas. Let the passes and the overlap and watch your speed. Let that all wet out the surface as you go. So again, 4 light dust coats, 4 to 6 wet coats. That should be all you need for Hyperdip to get a great result. Let's move on to the big stuff. Okay, now we're moving to the sprayer and the gallons or quarts or whatever base coat bulk that you're using. So we're going to be spraying this hood panel here. Now, it's still the same concept. When we get to our wet coats, we want to drag that wet edge down the panel just on a much larger scale. So when we're using our PDS base coats, and I think I have Shadow Glade in here, you're always going to want to start just like with the PDS or the DipYourCar aerosols with about a 50% coat just to get it set up. So let's get that down first. Now, while we let that dry, I want to talk to you about just dialing in the gun first. So with the DipYourCar G4 sprayer, whether you're using the Stage 1 or the Stage 3 Ultimate sprayer, which we'll cover in a moment, you want to dial in your spray pattern so you've got about a 7-inch fan about 8 to 10 inches away from the surface. So if I'm about here from the surface, I want about a 6 to 7 inch spray fan. If you get it too big, you're going to lose your shape. If you get it too small, you're not going to be able to cover the surface that you need to cover, and you may even get dry overspray. So 7-inch spray fan. This is going to dry just in about 5 to 10 minutes. Then we'll come in with our wet coats. Okay, our first setup coat with the sprayer is dry. Now we're going to go in, and just like everything else, every coat from here on out will be a full wet coat. So again, the concept here is to drag a wet edge across a panel. If you watch any of our videos, you'll notice that most of the time when we're spraying the side of a car or the hood of a car, as we move across the hood, the entire panel of the hood gets fully wet out as you drag that wet edge across. And when you're done with that hood, the entire hood is fully wet. It looks almost like a full gloss hood because we're not spraying dry. We're not allowing the droplets to kind of land individually and build a texture. We're dragging that wet edge across. So we're going to do that here. Now it's a little bit more challenging when using the Stage 1 DYC sprayer. So we're going to do that first. Then we'll move to the Ultimate because it's just that much easier. So take a look at this panel. If you can see it, the entire panel is wet. I can't identify any individual droplets. There's no dry areas. There's no dry sprays. I didn't miss anything. It all comes down to the 3 things that you can control: your speed, your distance, and your overlaps. If your speed is dialed in, if your distance is dialed in, and you're hitting those overlaps evenly, the whole panel will look nice and wet. And of course, you know by now, because it's all nice and wet, the entire thing will dry as one uniform coating, and it's going to be nice and smooth. Now, a wetter coat's going to take longer to dry, depending on your temperature, somewhere between 20 to 35 minutes. All right, our first coat of Shadow Glade out of the DYC G4 system is dry, and it is really, really smooth. PDS out of a gallon or a quart can get pretty darn smooth out of a sprayer system if you lay it right. Performance series colors are always going to lay a little bit smoother than traditional colors, but you're going to build up somewhere between 4 to 6 coats, wet coats of your base coat. And then if you're going to put a pearl top coat on top, like today we have our satin next gen top coat with, I think, Mardi Gras pearl in it. This is satin next gen is going to be the default for most DIY users. You're going to do the same thing. We want to preserve that super smooth finish. The same concept, drag that wet edge down. I know this is getting redundant, but I really want you guys to remember these things. And just like before with the aerosols, using a satin top coat is going to have a little bit more of a reflection. Therefore, it's going to show off more of what's on the surface. So it's really important to lay it nice and wet. So our base was sprayed with the Stage 1 G4 sprayer system, and that's going to be the default for most DIY customers. But the Ultimate system is also very popular, and I wanted to show you at least one coat with the DYC Ultimate system. So the Ultimate is about double the power of the standard G4 sprayer, which means it's going to atomize better, really hammer the product down. You're going to see that I'm able to move a lot faster, and it's just easier to get a good, smooth end result. And that's why a lot of people will actually spring for the more expensive Ultimate system. So let's get a wet coat down of the Dip Pearl top coat with the Ultimate. Wow, Mardi Gras actually looks pretty cool over the shadow glade. So as you can see again, the full panel is nice and wet, top to bottom, fully uniform, no dry spots, didn't miss anything. And as you know, this is going to allow everything to dry in one unified film. It's going to be super smooth. So let's let this dry, we'll come back. All right, so our wet coat of satin top coat with our pearl is nice and dry. And I really want to bring the shot in close here. We've got a nice smooth finish. Now, of course, this is not going to be a perfect mirror. We're not spraying 2K clear coat out of an Iwata and a compressor and paint correcting it. This is a DIY satin peelable top coat, but we don't have any rough texture. We don't have any pixelation. We don't have any little hard bumps like sandpaper because we didn't overspray. We made sure our overlaps completely wet out the surface as we went down. This is the type of surface that you want. So what do you want to watch out for? Where can things go wrong with the gun? Well, you want to make sure your gun is dialed in correctly. You want to make sure your breather hole is always clear. We have a troubleshooting video that covers all that stuff. You want to make sure that your distance, your speed, and your overlaps are correct so that you can drag that wet edge. It's really easy to do on horizontal surfaces, a little bit trickier on vertical, and just like with the aerosols, watch those tight concave corners. Don't force the product in there. You're not going to be able to wet things out the same way with aerosol because we're not atomizing as fine, but it's still the same principle. You want to stack those wet coats up, and the best you can, try to drag that wet edge across whatever panel you're spraying. All right, so we've covered DipYourCar aerosols, Pearl Top Coat aerosols, Hyperdip aerosols, and then base coat out of a gun and Dip Pearl Top Coat out of a gun. And they're all the same concept, but with different techniques. You want to try to wet out, fully wet out the panels that you're working on and drag that wet edge, whether it be top to bottom or left to right. Allowing the coating to dry in one uniform wet film will always give you the smoothest, best results. But I want to say something that might confuse you a little bit. Today I showed you exactly what to do to get the best finish possible using our peelable coatings. But only try to replicate what you saw in today's video if it's within your comfort zone and your skill set. If you're an experienced sprayer, replicating what I did today should be no problem at all. If you're brand new and you're worried about getting drips and sags and runs, don't worry about wetting out the entire panel top to bottom every square inch. Just try to get as close to that as you can, because outside of overdoing it, because there's always a limit, the wetter the panel, the better the result. So if you're a first timer and you watch this video and it helps you lay it wetter, even if it's not 100% perfect, you're still gonna get a better end result than you would have if you didn't watch the video and you just sprayed it on there lightly and let all the texture and everything pile up. So I hope that makes sense. Try to replicate what you saw today, but within your comfort zone. Now, if you have any questions at all, before, during, or after the project, don't hesitate to contact us at DipYourCar.com. We love to talk you guys through your projects because we want you to get the most out of what you purchase. So if you want to change the color of your car, your wheels, if you want to play with any of our paints, because we've got both peelable and permanent, head straight to DipYourCar.com. I had a lot of fun in this video. I hope you got something out of it. I'll see you on the next one.